Welcome to part 2 of the series here on our channel of the worst playoff series by star caliber players. Part 1 will be on a card here as well as in the description. You can go back and watch that after this episode. Speaking of this episode, we're going to be doing a 2019 edition, I guess, because it seems like the 2019 playoffs had many stars having low points in their careers when it comes to disappointing playoff performances. And it's not just based on how bad they were statistically, it was also based on things that were at stake, the magnitude of the moment, and the expectations of a particular player that they set for themselves in that point in time. With that being said, like, comment, share, subscribe, but without further ado, enough from me talking about this, let's get into the video. Number 4, Giannis Antetokounmpo in the 2019 playoffs against the Toronto Raptors. Coming into the 2019 playoffs, Giannis had just won his first MVP award and was quickly ascending as one of the best players in the league. However, there was never really too much pressure on him up until this point. After all, he was the 15th pick. The Bucks were first round exits the previous 3 times they had made the playoffs, but in 2019, they had busted onto the scene, winning 60 plus games. Their system was perfect. Giannis had ascended to superstar levels, Chris Middleton was at an all-star level, and they had surrounded those guys with shooters everywhere you looked. They were poised for a deep playoff run. All that came crashing down at the hands of Cyborg Kawhi Leonard. The Bucks took a commanding 2-0 lead against the Raptors in the Eastern Conference Finals, but as soon as the Raptors made adjustments and locked in, the series was pretty much over, and the Bucks had no shot. In the first 2 games, Giannis was pretty fine, averaging 27 points, 15 rebounds, 5 assists on 40% shooting from the field, but in the remaining 4 games, Giannis was not good up to his standards at least, averaging 21 points per game, 12 rebounds, and 5 assists on only 43% shooting from the field. And yeah, you can still look at that stat line and say, hey, he put up pretty decent numbers, but the eye test says it all, as well as this number. His 45% from the field for the entire series was his second lowest in any playoff series of his career, as he's only had 4 playoff series in which he's even shot under 50%. And with this, it's not the numbers that give the Raptors justice on how they defended Giannis, the eye test says it all. They built a wall around him, making him relatively ineffective for large chunks of the series. Giannis was stifled even in the transition game, as he was seeing 2 to 3 bodies each time he attempted to go downhill. This led to very few transition buckets for the Greek Freak, as he was unable to use his long strides to get to the basket. Prior to the most recent series against the Celtics this year, he recorded a career postseason high for turnovers in a series with 4.2 turnovers per game. The Raptors forced Giannis to play in the half court, and that right there exposed the rest of his game. Giannis was still relatively raw, with very few moves outside of a Euro step and occasional spin move. He was forced to settle for many mid-range jumpers, and it was very ugly to watch. After the series, the focus by everybody was about how Giannis has to develop his game further for the Bucks to have a chance to win a championship, as him being the best player. Now, I do gotta tell the whole story of this series. A main reason why Giannis wasn't good in the half court was because Toronto was able to shrink the floor due to them not being worried about guarding the Bucks shooters. 3 of the rotational guys shot under 28% from the field, and that was led by Eric Bledsoe, who shot 17% from 3 in the series and only 29% on catch and shoot opportunities. So Giannis' supporting cast for the most part failed to take any type of pressure off him. And Coach Bud took some deserved heat for not having Giannis post up more, using him as a screener, and putting him in actions to free him up a little bit more. All in all, it doesn't take away from the fact that this was the worst playoff series of Giannis' career, as far as I'm concerned, but I'm happy we got to see him shut up the critics and naysayers that he wasn't going to be good enough. Of course, he and the Bucks won the 2021 NBA championship, and at that point, there's nothing you can say about Giannis. Number 3, Joel Embiid versus the Raptors in the 2019 NBA playoffs. Man, looking back on it, the Toronto Raptors really had one of the greatest runs in NBA history as a team, but too bad this video isn't about them. But with that being said, they were the cause of another star player having his worst series in his career up to date. The Philly process seemed like it was all coming together. Joel Embiid was at his healthiest he had ever been in his career, and he had become a superstar overnight. Ben Simmons was a first-time All-Star in 2019, and as for as much negativity that he's associated with now, back then, he was beloved and was living up to the potential as an all-around All-Star, minus the shooting of course. and the Sixers had acquired both Tobias Harris and Jimmy Butler that trade deadline, as the process was looking like it was almost complete. Like the Bucks, the Sixers were also poised for a championship run, but of course Kawhi shut that down. Or should I say in this case, Marc Gasol shut that down. By the end of the series, Gasol had Embiid looking like this. In 7 games against the Raptors, Joel Embiid was wildly inefficient, and when I say wild, I mean it. Honestly, I could just only say that he shot 37% from the field during the series and move on to the next guy, but we do have to talk about why and how this happened. Marc Gasol and the Raptors had the mindset that if they stayed disciplined with Embiid, they'd be just fine. Embiid had developed a habit of finessing foul calls with his finesse game and his flopping as he climbed to being one of the league leaders in free throw attempts per game. In this series, he attempted about 8 free throws per game, which seems like a lot still, but outside of games 3 and 4, the games where he shot over 10 free throws, they did a very great job of guarding him. It got to the point where Embiid was more worried about trying to draw a foul than actually making the shot, and that's where a bunch of his misses came from, as well as turnovers. They were also very content with Embiid shooting the 3 ball all series long. Gasol, as well as Ibaka, took turns guarding Embiid, while they really didn't have to bring too many double teams. They decided to kind of show like they're packing the paint, which would confuse Embiid and have him pause for a second, even causing him to be passive at times, because he had 3 games in which he had 10 shot attempts or fewer. In those 3 games, he was 9 of 24 shooting. Of course, Brett Brown deserves some of the blame for this, because he didn't know how to play Ben Simmons. Simmons stood at the 3-point line a good chunk of the series, which allowed his defender to help out on Embiid post-ups. But overall, Embiid only had 2 games in which he eclipsed 40% shooting from the field. Through all of that, the Sixers were still only a couple plays away from winning that series in Game 7 and moving on to their first Eastern Conference Finals appearance of the process era. But we all know what happened, and unfortunately, 3 years later, Philly has had great chances but has still failed to reach the Eastern Conference Finals, let alone the Finals, as there's only so much more a superstar player can go through before a change of scenery seems like the way to go. Number 2, Kyrie Irving versus the Bucks in the 2019 playoffs. Right now, Kyrie's one of the more polarizing players in the league. Back then, he was one of the more polarizing players in the league. What made him so polarizing was that in 2017, the All-Star guard had forced his way out of Cleveland a year after winning the title, as he was tired of being under LeBron's shadow pretty much, which is understandable to some degree. He ends up in Boston, and they quickly assemble a championship caliber team with 2 young guns, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, All-Star Gordon Hayward, Al Horford, and of course, Kyrie. Unfortunately, Hayward breaks his ankle in the first 5 minutes of the season. Then Kyrie gets hurt right before the 2018 playoffs. But the Celtics still found a way to make the Eastern Conference Finals without their top 2 guys. Coming back in 2019, there were huge expectations for the Celtics to at least make it to the finals. Kyrie and Hayward will both be back. Then the assumption was Tatum and Brown would come back even better, having that deep playoff experience under their belt. But they were dysfunctional. They had ups and downs throughout the regular season, and many were questioning as to why this was happening with such a talented group. Some even went as far as to say that they were better without Kyrie. Through all the struggles, the Celtics still ended up getting a 4th seed that year and were still looking to make a deep run. They swept the Pacers in impressive fashion in the first round, and that set up a date with the Milwaukee Bucks. I and many others still thought the Celtics were more than capable of making it to the finals at the time, and that held up to be true after Game 1. As Boston, while on the road, blew out the number 1 seeded Bucks, and Kyrie was the best player on the floor, dropping 26 points and 11 assists, getting pretty much whatever he wanted, getting to his spot, and things like that. However, that was the only decent game he had in the series, as in the last 4 games of the series, he shot 30% from the field and 18% from 3, including a horrendous 4 of 18 shooting in Game 2. In Game 3, he had shot 8 for 22, and after the game, when asked about his poor shooting, his response to the media was something along the lines of, "You won't see me shoot that bad again in this series." And he was right. He actually shot worse than 8 for 22, going 7 of 22 from the field in Game 4. And at that point, the series effectively was over. The Bucks didn't even seem to do nothing crazy when it came to defending Kyrie. They just made sure all his mid-rangers were highly contested, that he had size on him at all times to contest those shots, as well as his attacks to the basket. As we all know, Kyrie is one of the best under-the-basket finishers in NBA history, so the Bucks made sure they stuck to their usual game plan of packing the paint, and Kyrie was always met with length at the rim, where he was inefficient as a finisher as well. I vividly remember in this series, Kyrie having tunnel vision when he was doing his thing. Terry Rozier, Jason Tatum, Marcus Morris were all open on many occasions when Kyrie had the ball, because all the attention was on him, of course. They lost in 5, and Kyrie had packed his bags after his short stint in Boston was full of dysfunctionality and disappointment. He ended up signing with the Brooklyn Nets after promising the Boston fans that he'd stay. But fortunately for the Celtics, they seem to be in pretty good hands despite Kyrie. Number 1. Russell Westbrook versus the Portland Trail Blazers in the 2019 playoffs. 2017 featured Russ in his best form ever. He was MVP of the league after leading his team to a 6th seed in the tough Western Conference. So that year was no fault of Russell Westbrook for the Thunder going home early. What more do you want the guy to do? Fast forward to 2018, the Thunder got Russ help, bringing in Paul George and Carmelo Anthony, effectively creating the OK3 Big Three. As we all know, that team was highly disappointing, as it seemed like all season they were just trying to figure it out, and somewhat they did as they grabbed the 4th seed. That set up a series versus the Jazz, and there was no way the Thunder should have lost that series, and the questions were starting to pile up for Russell Westbrook. Is he a team player? Can he be the best player on a championship level team? Should the Thunder blow it up? And things like that. Coming back in 2019, they got rid of Carmelo Anthony, fine-tuned the roster a little bit, developed Jeremy Grant, and although they had dropped to a 6th seed in 2019, they looked like a better overall team, more together. Paul George had emerged as an MVP candidate, and things were starting to look up for the Thunder. I remember vividly we were talking about them as a potential dark horse for a big run in the Western Conference. The first roadblock to that was the Portland Trail Blazers and Damian Lillard. Now, Russell's had plenty of bad shooting series, but this one takes the cake from just an eye test standpoint. Him going up against Damian Lillard was one of the worst things to happen in his career. Dame got the best of him with ease, and it was looking bad considering the trash talk and heated moments that these guys have had over the years. Russ averaged 23 a game and shot an abysmal 36% from the field and averaged 5 turnovers per game. On the other side, Damian Lillard averaged 33 points per game on 46% shooting from the field and a scorching 48% from 3. And as we all know, sent Russ and the Thunder home with this shot.
Lillard, a chance to send the Thunder home. Lillard, long-range 3, and it's good! At the buzzer! Damian Lillard! Are you kidding me?
From the jump, it wasn't really anything the Blazers were doing to cause Russ to struggle. I think in general, whenever Russ struggles for the most part, he's the reason for it. What I mean by that is he commits too many careless turnovers. He takes too many ill-advised shots. He takes really bad fouls. And in this series, they made all those tendencies look 100 times worse. Why? Because it seemed as if Russ was so focused on the individual battle with Damian Lillard, it took his focus away from actually playing the game and helping his team win. Dame, on the other hand, was calm, cool, and collected, which allowed him to stay focused and execute to help the Blazers win the series in 5 games. You can just see it. Every time Dame would come down to make a big shot, Russ would try to immediately come down and try to match that intensity. And the intensity was there, as always it is for Russell Westbrook, but it wasn't used in the right way. He was too riled up and too emotional in that series, and Dame just took advantage of it, and he sent the Thunder home, and that was the end of the Russ OKC era. With that being said, that's going to wrap up this video, man. I'm really enjoying doing these videos so far. Whether to get views or not, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm going to continue to keep pushing these out. If y'all are watching this though, and y'all want to see another episode of this, let me know which stars that I haven't talked about yet that I should talk about having their worst playoff series. I'm thinking about doing eventually like a throwback one for pretty much all the legends and them having their worst series, because believe it or not, those legends do have bad series under their belt, and it's going to be interesting to kind of go back in time and like kind of research and talk about it. So if that's something y'all want to see, y'all can let me know in the comments down below. But with that being said, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. This is Jimmy from Just the Facts Hoops, and I'm signing out. Peace.